afternoon. Good to see everybody. My name is Paul Williams. I'm from the University of Nebraska at Omaha, and I'm delighted to see you here. This has been a quite extraordinary experience, certainly the most international of the international conferences I have attended. So it's a real pleasure to be here, and the organizers, as well as those who are in charge of keeping us organized, have done a beautiful job. So thank you to you guys as well. We have 4 papers. I have spoken with the speakers. They will have up to 20 minutes each. If they finish before that, there will be time for questions. If they finish at 20 minutes, we will have to depend on conversation in the hallway and in receptions, but I think we all understand this. So we will, in the interest of moving forward, we will begin. Oh, by the way, if you have a cell phone, please mute it. Or put it on vibrate or something so it's not a distraction as people are speaking and trying to understand the translation as well. The first paper by Gregory Watkins of Stanford University is entitled Time the Redeemer. Time as an Object of Cinema in a Post-Metaphysical Age. Dr. Watkins.
Thanks, Paul. And I'd like to add my voice to that chorus of voices, thanking the organizers. It's really been a wonderful symposium, and I feel fortunate to be here. So I want to say 2 prefatory notes. One is that my particular interest in film and religion is to look out for, I'm on the lookout for things that connect to religion but aren't overtly in the movie. In other words, aren't connected to a specific religious tradition or aren't explicitly religious on the face of it. And so that's a particular interest of mine. And in this paper, I'm trying to say something about the fact that there are a lot of time loop movies being created by Hollywood lately. And I've been wondering why that's the case. And so I have some thoughts to offer on that. There's a sense in which time is fundamental to the cinematic experience. On the one hand, the physical medium, at least originally, had a constant mechanical rhythm, the frame rate of whatever is being projected. And on the other hand, the content of any particular movie is free to play with the pace and even the direction of time. Russian filmmaker Tarkovsky titled his important book about cinema sculpting in time, as if that phrase somehow captured the essence of filmmaking. So even though one could argue that the manipulation of time is inherent to film as an art, there's been a curious increase in Hollywood movies that take time itself as a central narrative thread to achieve dramatic purposes. Just as quick examples, Inception, Edge of Tomorrow, and Interstellar are recent big office movies that play with time. And if it is working for Hollywood, it might be an indication of a larger cultural trend, at least in the US. The project of this paper is to take a look at this trend and to think out loud about what it might be saying about religion and religious sensibilities. In my own mind, I've been drawing loose connections between this trend and certain philosophers and theorists of religion. This paper will explore those connections and, at least this is my hunch, will ultimately suggest that the experience of time as an express object of thought in movies has been driven by the operation of the religious imagination, in what I will call here a post-metaphysical age, which I'll explain. In a secularized culture where transcendental and supernatural realms are in competition with one another, highly contested, or even flat out denied, the religious imagination turns to a meditation on the nature of time itself as a kind of hermeneutical key to human purposes and meaning in the broadest sense. So I have 4 quick parts to my paper. The first part, I will describe something I was noticing in certain movies before I took an interest in the time loop movies. There I was seeing what I will call a certain Gnostic sensibility in some movies. In particular, the notion that we are living in some kind of false or oppressive reality that needs to be escaped in order to return to a true reality, along with the notion that the return will somehow be redemptive. So that's the Gnostic trope. In this first part, I'll focus on Chris Marker's La Jetée to give you a sense, even though it's an older movie, of what that Gnostic trope looks like, and then 2 Hollywood movies, The Truman Show and The Matrix. In the second part, I want to bridge that Gnostic trope to time loop movies in particular. And in the third part, I'll talk about where I see links to certain religious thinkers, philosophers. And then in the fourth part, I want to think about human values in particular, partly prompted by interests of the organizers at this festival, at the symposium. Okay, part one, the Gnostic trope and La Jetée. For those of you who may not have seen this movie, this plot is somewhat easily retold, as easy as a time loop movie can be retold. So I'll attempt that here. In a post-apocalyptic age, after the Third World War, men are confined to living underground because it's just too toxic above ground. Because the world has become uninhabitable, the leaders of the underground camp have begun experiments in time travel as a way to escape the dystopian universe they live in. To do this, they use strong personal memories of some of the camp's inmates. The protagonist of the movie is someone with precisely that kind of memory, a powerful childhood memory of the face of a woman you see in the image here, standing on a jetty, a pier at an airport, hence the title of the movie in French, La Jetée, the jetty. With some assistance from some kind of drug, this particular inmate is sent back to the time of his childhood, just before the war, where he meets the same woman, but now as his adult self. Through repeated visits, a relationship develops. Without going into too much detail, it eventually happens that the prisoner tries to escape from the post-apocalyptic present by returning to the earlier time permanently. Launched back to the past for the final time, he hopes, he finds himself on the same airport terminal pier of his original memory. He soon discovers that the camp experimenters, in order to prevent his escape, have sent someone to kill him, following him back in time. So in a sudden circling back of the plot, and spoiler alert for those of you who have not seen it, it turns out that it was his own death that he observed on the pier as a child. So there's a certain narrative pleasure that comes from this plot twist. There's something just fun about using time in that way as an element of the plot. Let's see, I'm choosing to skip this part. But what I want to argue is that, here are some other images from La Jetée, is that this Gnostic trope, what I'm arguing takes place in this movie, is that there's some kind of being caught in some fundamental misperception of reality or some unsatisfying condition, in this case the post-apocalyptic world, that it's important to be released from this bad situation, and that correcting the misperception is redemptive, bringing us back to a more authentic existence. Now, in Gnosticism, historically, this was a problem of knowledge. We just didn't know what was really going on. We needed to find out what was really going on, and that would be redemptive. In this movie, they're caught in a post-apocalyptic world. They're trying to escape it by going back in time to what is really our present, the present of the audience. So while I'm playing fast and loose with the terms, I take this trope in broad outline, as I've described here, this misperception and escape from misperception to a new reality, to have a strange new twist. In the case of Chris Marker, the film was the place of redemption, as it were, the place we were trying to escape to, was precisely the world of the audience, namely the pre-apocalyptic, everyday world that the audience member lives in. The protagonist of Marker's film is trying to get back to us. His trips to our time, though motivated by the interests in a particular woman, are presented in such a way that our everyday world is the place of redemption in the Gnostic trope. This is a strange twist on Gnostic aspirations. So the plot of Marker's movie has this shape, but through the element of time travel, the place the protagonist is trying to get to is the here and now of the people watching the movie. There's an important sense in which the audience will leave this movie back into the light of day, but with the here and now of the light of day being transfigured by the experience of the movie. So my argument is that in trying to get back to us, our own present has been transfigured by the movie. If the here and now of our everyday experience is the redemptive target of the movie's protagonist, perhaps it can be ours too. This argument about Marker's movie is my central insight for this paper as a whole. The rest of the paper is to show how this kind of thing continues to show up in movies and to try to elaborate on what it might signal about contemporary religious imagination. The next thing I noticed, probably just through the accidents of my own movie viewing, was two blockbuster movies that employed the same kind of trope, though not necessarily with the time loop. These movies were The Truman Show and The Matrix. In both cases, the protagonists slowly awaken to the fact that their entire lives are false in some important sense. In the case of The Truman Show, Truman is in a world of a TV show where only he doesn't know that he's in a TV show. In coming to know the falseness of his immediate world, though in all other ways it looks and operates like the world of the audience, he develops a yearning to join the real world, which is the everyday world of the movie audience. So in this movie, when he exits the false world of the Truman TV show, he literally steps through a door that leads to the world of the audience. So this Gnostic trope of redemption, again, leads back to the world of the audience. The Matrix is its own kind of puzzle film, which a lot of people have written about, has these redemptive tropes as well. And in this case, in a curious inversion compared to Marker's movie, Neo, the main character of The Matrix, wants out of the falseness of the illusory but pre-apocalyptic world of the Matrix in order to be in the post-apocalyptic but real underground world of suffering and struggle. But what would he and his companions most want as an even more redemptive place? They would want the world of the audience, the very real pre-apocalyptic, everyday world of our here and now. They want to establish an authentic here and now that is free of the illusion of the Matrix, even though that world is in every other way the same as the world of the audience. So in the second part, so these are Gnostic tropes that I see functioning in movies generally, and then with the time loop movies, I think there's been a kind of transformation of this to use time in particular to get at the same sensibility. So I haven't thought about this systematically yet. I'm just starting to think about this, so I haven't done a complete inventory of these kinds of movies, although there are many. You could probably make a list of your own. I've mentioned Edge of Tomorrow, Interstellar, Inception, Groundhog Day, although a little older, obviously plays with the time loop. A more recent movie called Looper, which I'll talk a little bit more about, as well as a movie called Predestination I would have on the list, although I won't talk about that. So these movies manipulate time as a plot device. And my interest is in whether this Gnostic trope shows up in that time loop construction. And then my argument here is that I think what's driving this is because in what I call a post-metaphysical or secular age, metaphysical constructions of the nature of reality, the nature of God, of a kind of heaven and hell, etc., because those are so contested, time itself being innocuous in that respect, it's general and everybody has to think about time, allows us to get at these same tropes without invoking a certain tradition. So to think more about how that might connect to religion specifically, in my third part, I want to draw a quick link to Eliade, who's a quite well-known theorist of religion, comparative religionist. In his various works on sacred and profane time, and by extension on myth and historical time, Eliade makes an argument about a kind of fundamental difference between contemporary historical consciousness and the sacred sensibilities of what he calls archaic consciousness. In the collection of essays entitled Myths, Dreams, and Mysteries, Eliade goes to great lengths to show how what he calls the fall into history broke the social, cultural link to fundamental stories of sacred time and purpose. Instead of cultural practices organized around stories and rituals of sacred time, our fall into history has given us the world of the clock, of the endless ticking of secular time, second after second. So for Eliade, cultural practices around this secularized time, rather than being sacralized through myth, have tended in the direction of modes of distraction, of ways of escaping this profoundly profane historical time. So, for example, he might talk about something like video games as that kind of distraction, sports and the popularity of sports. In sports, we're given a time-bound arena for a set of actions where the clock ticking down to zero is the replacement for what had been in archaic societies sacred practices at the cosmic level. So for thinkers of Eliada's strike, there's a kind of loss in this change. Or at least we can talk about a kind of residue of archaic consciousness. This has been a paradigmatic shift in our sense of how time works, but we retain some of that older, sacred, mythical way of thinking. So with this kind of thinking, there's at least an opportunity to explore how the movies that interest me here might be themselves evidence of a residue of an archaic religious imagination. Because the old mythic stories of a sacred cosmos no longer have any currency, the cultural imagination, you might say, has found a way to use time itself as a narrative device to redeem present time through a meditation on time, to transfigure the present through the manipulation of our perception of that present, through an imaginative adventure into alternative avenues of time, only to return to the present in its now transfigured state. Of course, Eliade is not the only option here. I would think that Heideggerian influence on certain modern theories of religion would also offer opportunities for understanding the religious resonance of this cluster of movies, or perhaps to be linked more directly to Heidegger's thought itself and then bridged to religion from there. So the fourth part, as I mentioned at the beginning, was to try to think. So for me, the timepiece linked to Eliade has to do with kind of sacredness and mythic thinking, what I call the Gnostic trope of some kind of redemptive move. And then the last part, in thinking about human values, and I don't really have time to go into the plot of this movie, or maybe I'll try it quickly verbally. This movie, Looper, which came out in 2012, is about, the plot is there are guys who assassinate people who are being sent back in time from a future. So the crime mob sends people back in time, and they're executed as they arrive back in time. And occasionally, the person who's executing these people, their future self is sent back in time to be executed. So, and it's a really fun movie, and in this case, the young Joe on top here meets his older self, is supposed to execute him, and the old Joe escapes. He's on a kind of mission of his own. At the end of the movie, again, the spoiler alert, young Joe is in a position where he's kind of in a moral quandary. Does he protect a woman and child that he's gotten to know, that his old self is trying to kill that child? Or does he prevent that death against his future self? So I won't go into the details of how that amounts to a meditation on human value, but I make the argument that it's the time loop here again that is trying to get at religious tropes of self-sacrifice, of service to others, etc., by way of the time loop construction rather than religious, traditionally religious ways of talking about those themes. So that's my pitch. I've left a few minutes to see if you have any thoughts about it. Thank you.
We have about 2.5 minutes left. Do we have any questions for Gregory Watkins? Yes, sir.
Yes, thanks so much. That's very interesting. I'll go and mull on it all. But a question, why redemption? It seems to me that you are talking about removal of false consciousness.
Right.
So why redemption? Redemption for me would be a much heavier term, meaning lots more about handling evil and stuff. So it just sounds a bit weak.
Yeah, so maybe it's not the best word. Certainly transfiguration, but of a sort, I don't know. And so we maybe have to hash out what we each mean by redemption. But I think there's a kind of a reevaluation in a deeply positive direction that comes as a result. So if we focus on La Jetée, for example, for those of you who know the film, it's constructed via photo montage. So it's not moving images, but there's a section which suddenly that montage speeds up, and this woman that he's been visiting, we suddenly see her as if we were seeing a real person. So that transfiguration of the present here and now in some deep and through a kind of deep reevaluation, I would call redemptive, but maybe we'd have to have a longer talk about that. Maybe that's the wrong word.
I'm wondering if you, thanks very much, Greg. I'm wondering if you have thought a little further in sort of a topological way about how these time elements are parsed out and or manifest themselves differently. So for instance, in Inception, you've got not just time travel, you've got a multiplicity of simultaneous, quote unquote, times, if that's even possible to think.
Yep.
You also have things like forking path narratives, which are not exactly time travel, but they're contingent on the moment and particularities of the accident in time. You know, these types of varieties, do they feed into kind of your larger thought about how time functions religiously?
Those are great questions, and I'm just at the beginning of this, so I'd have to. That's exactly where I think I would need to go, is to start to compare those things. But my intuition is that what unifies them all is this: for them to fit into this category that I'm arguing for, there has to be an emphasis on the present moment that matches the moment of the audience's own present. That's what's fascinating to me, is that no matter what's going on out there with the forking paths and the layers of reality and manipulation of time, we end up back thinking about our own present here and now as somehow transfigured.
Okay, very good. Right on time.
Yes.
Our next speaker is... While she is setting up, our next speaker is Sophia Sho of the Abo Academy University in Finland. Her topic is Madness, Otherness, and Transformation, Exploring Religion in Nordic Crime Films. Give her a moment to boot it up and...
Which one should I press? Thank you. Well, as you heard, the topic of my presentation is religion in contemporary Nordic crime films. This paper is a part of my postdoctoral research on religion in contemporary Nordic films. But it was one of these topics I wanted to do as part of the project, but there was never enough time. So I'm very glad that this conference came around and I had the reason to work on this, and that I was invited to come and present. Now, I think you've all noticed that crime is popular, at least as a genre. Whether it's in the form of novels, films, and TV series, crime is today reaching really huge audiences. And it's also the case that, well, at least some forms of Nordic crime fiction has gotten a lot of international interest, particularly Swedish and Danish crime fiction. But there are a lot of other examples as well. So here I've just collected some of the most known ones. As the general interest in crime fiction has grown, so has academic interest to look at this. I would say that academics have been quite slow at starting to look to crime fiction, despite the fact that this is such a popular genre and has been for quite some time. There have been lately some really interesting studies, but I would say there's still a lot to be done when it comes to crime fiction. My paper builds on studies of Nordic crime fiction and studies that have particularly looked at crime fiction from the perspective of ideology, and argued that to understand contemporary Nordic society, we need to look at crime fiction also, not just crime fiction, of course. But they argue, because particularly police procedurals, that's sort of the typical Nordic crime fiction, because these are stories that really look to many aspects of society, the underbelly of society, and often present a critique also of society. They are interesting from the perspective of ideology. And I find them to be interesting too if we're looking at attitudes to religion today. Now, exploring religion and crime is actually not a new topic. theologians, or a couple of theologians, were fairly quick with noticing that crime is interesting also from the perspective of religious and theological studies. So just to mention one example, David Spencer, in his study from 1989, Mysterium and Mystery, the clerical crime novel, he even argues here that the Christian tradition, the crime genre is a key element of the Christian tradition, and that the original mystery is the mysterium of Christianity. Now, you don't need to agree with that to still be able to agree with the fact that a lot of crime stories include elements such as questions of right and wrong, good and evil, sin and punishment, forgiveness, atonement, redemption, which are, of course, very, very key themes in theology. And one of the characters of one of the novels, or a character from a novel that he looks at, it's Chesterton's Father Brown, and this is the BBC version of Father Brown. They just made a TV series dealing with Father Brown. Now, my own interest is not really theological. I'm more interested in how religious characters are constructed in crime fiction, how religious themes and symbols are used, and what are really their functions in the stories. And I'm also asked the question, whose religion is given what parts in this in Nordic crime fiction. Just shortly going to present the one film here. But it's a film I feel manages well to combine or to bring together the main ways in which religion is normally constructed in contemporary Nordic crime fiction. It's not a particularly well-known film. It's not even a particularly good film, so if you're interested in Nordic crime fiction, don't start with this one. You're going to get the wrong idea. But like I said, it works for my purpose here. The English title of the film is Priest of Evil. It's a film from 2010, directed by Olli Saarela. And I could mention about Saarela that he's known to deal with religious themes in his films, so he's shown an interest in religion before. And in that sense, it's not particularly surprising that we find quite a few religious characters in this film also. It's loosely based on a novel, but the director has taken quite a lot of creative freedom in interpreting the novel. Now, when you explore religion, I think particularly when you explore religion in crime, or in genre fiction, it's important to keep in mind the religion we find here, the religious characters, themes, and symbols, they will always be shaped in accordance with the needs of the narratives and the needs of the stories and what you're trying to do. Because crime fiction it's a form of thriller, and the point with thrillers is what's usually to create thrills and tension and excitement in some sense. This is the form religion will take here. This is how religion will be constructed. It's very, unless, of course there are stories where we find different kinds of religion, but usually the fluffy, nice type of religion, it doesn't fill a purpose in these stories. So that's not the religion we're going to find here. So these films are, of course, not any direct reflection of society. But I still think that they can capture attitudes and understandings of religion today. A very typical character that we find in films dealing with, or crime films dealing with religion, and that we also find in Priest of Evil, is the religiously inspired killer. In this case, his name is Johannes. You can see him here. He's a fairly young man. He's not a priest, but he's the son of a preacher, we're told. His father was extremely abusive towards him and his mother. He also killed Johannes' mother. And Johannes, as a child, tried to escape from his father, but he was unsuccessful. But he interpreted this as a sign from God, a sign that God had a mission for him. And this mission is to kill men like his father, which he does by pushing them in front of subway trains. There's a very obvious salvation theme connected to Johannes. He seems to see himself as a form of savior. He even has the word salvation tattooed on his stomach. But of course, it's salvation kind of turned on its head. Often when we find salvation themes in films, it's represented or constructed as something rather good. But in this case, the character, he starts off as sort of kind of nice, but he becomes more and more dark throughout the film. And in fact, in many ways, turns into his father, because he's just as abusive, for example, towards women as his father was. But an example then of religion constructed as something mad or bad. If you continue, there are other elements of religion in the film as well. What I've termed traditional religion, which of course in the Nordic context means the Lutheran Church, basically. We get to take part in a confirmation of the main policeman's daughter. These scenes are represented as quite positive. This is religion constructed as not as much of a problem as the religion connected to Johannes. However, what comes through here is still the sense of being religious, meaning being kind of naive. And this is particularly connected to the main character's wife, who we see here with the murderer, Elisa, who is tricked by the murderer, who uses her faith kind of against her to lure her away from her family and finally to get her to his home where he sexually abuses her. So there's this idea of, okay, not all forms of religion are bad, but if you're religious, you are probably also kind of at least slightly naive. And even these scenes of the confirmation, which are, it's in a big church, there's lots of lights, but it turns out that the murderer is spying on the family. So there's a threat in these scenes as well. Now, generally in Nordic crime fiction, the religion constructed as a problem is usually also very obviously othered. So it's also constructed as being connected to the other. In some cases we have Muslim characters that usually have a foreign background, but usually there are Christian characters that are connected to some form of Christianity. It's usually not a named group, but they are often represented as charismatic, or in other ways not traditionally boring Lutheran. There's something different with them. But this othering is particularly done with the setting. Most Nordic crime films dealing with religion are set not in culture centers, not in the big cities. They're in the countryside, they're up in the north, they're in small communities. And this is sort of explained that in these peripheral areas, that's where the mad religious people live. But Priest of Evil partly breaks with this mold, because the film actually takes place in Helsinki. However, here too, with setting and where we find these religious spaces where they are set, religion is othered. So apart from this positively represented main church, there are lots of alternative religious spaces, but they are all peripheral to the society. So for example, the main character, the main policeman, pursues fairly early on in the film the murderer down into the subway tunnels, and he comes across this space where apparently Johannes has written in what we can assume as blood on the wall, save yourself, and there's a cross made of iron bars, and on the ground there are white doves that have been killed and apparently in a sense sacrificed. So there are these alternative religious spaces, but they're hidden away under the city, peripheral and so on. This is largely where a lot of Nordic crime films end in their representation of religion. This is sort of what they have to say. But there are some that continue and give perhaps a slightly more hopeful representation or construction of religion. And this is the case with Priest of Evil. So final religious character that we find in the film is actually the main character, Timo Harjunpää, the main policeman. He and his family has been through these really traumatic events. 2 years before the now of the film, their oldest daughter was murdered. And this is really, of course, it's really affected the film. Timo and his wife are not really speaking. They've been estranged from each other. And Timo can only focus on one thing, and that is to get revenge on the young man that killed his daughter. Because the killer was very young in this case, he only got a very short prison sentence, and Timo is determined to find out when he will be released and to kill him. And when the man is released, he is kidnapped by Timo Harjunpää, and Timo brings him to the place where the daughter was murdered. And in this monologue that kind of follows, there's a lot of religious references used, particularly then by the Harjunpää himself. He, for example, talks about how the law for him used to be his Bible. That was what he lived according to. But now the gun is his Bible. That is what he uses to deal with his life. Now, of course, he doesn't kill the young man. Come on, he's the hero. He's stopped by one of his colleagues, and instead the scene becomes, in a sense, a catharsis. So after this, he can return to, apparently he's been a very good policeman, and now he can return to the case of trying to find the murderer. Towards the end of the film, he's saved his wife, he's captured the murderer, and the family is brought back together again. But even in this final frame of the film, there are references to religion. So in the final frame, we can read this prayer. I'll read it for you because it's quite far down. It's of course in Finnish in the film, but this is the English version. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the one from the other. And I at least read this as relating to Timo Harjunpää's and his narrative structure in the film. But of course others might read it in different ways. So then, of course, we have religion then is quite constructed as quite something problematic in the film, but also this idea that religion can be something that helps you through traumatic events. So finally, I'm speaking really fast, I'm afraid. Will be time for questions then. Finally, to sort of then summarize some of my thoughts on what crime fiction, Nordic crime fiction, possibly can sort of suggest about attitudes to religion today. Well, very obviously, I would say that the films express secular values as the norm. It's not really normal to be very religious. It's maybe normal to be slightly religious, to go to church, to take part in sort of rites of passage, not to go to the church regularly. You do that on Christmas, that's about it. It's okay also to be privately religious, but religion very often is not represented as something that can save you. It can help you through to hard or to really serious issues, to the most part. And very obviously, people that take religion too seriously are constructed as somehow suspicious. There is something wrong if your life is too devoted to religion, according to these films. And I would argue that that fits with the thinking of a lot of people in the Nordic countries. However, these films at the same time show that religion is, of course, present in Nordic society as well. It doesn't matter how secular we feel that we are. There are churches, there are rituals. The films also very often use a lot of symbolism, religious symbolism, that unless you are acquainted with particularly the Christian tradition, you wouldn't understand these elements in the films. So in that sense, it lives on. So it may be more sensible than to think of it as post-secular societies, in the sense that as societies that religion is a part of them. To understand these societies, we have to also take religion seriously. But religion in these societies often come through people via media, such as for example, films. And post-secular societies, it has also been argued, it doesn't mean that if a country is considered or society is considered to be post-secular, that is not the same as saying that they're positive towards religion or positive even to religious diversity. Instead, post-secular societies can also be very critical towards religious diversity. And the films, more generally, can of course also be argued to show these are changing societies. And crime fiction have been argued to deal with these changes, to deal with the conflicts that come with change, be it religious or whatever kind of change that. And perhaps we can relate it to this as well. And finally, at least films like Priest of Evil do suggest that for some people, religion is perhaps what is needed. If you've gone through a huge trauma, if you are sort of situated on the periphery, on the outskirts of society, then maybe religion can be a way for you to continue. It can also make you insane, but it can also make you to help you to go along and continue with your life. And that's it.
We do have about 3 minutes for questions, if you have any. Does anyone have any questions for Sophia? Gloria, are you standing up because you have a question?
I'm standing to get a picture.
Oh, yes, Clive.
Does anybody else want to go? I've asked the question already, if there is anybody. No? I was struck by where you ended up in terms of the normality or not of religion. Is there much of a market for these films beyond Western Europe and North America? Because if you put the Nordic experience in a global realm, it's the Nordic experience that's unusual.
Oh yes,
And
yeah.
I just wonder how that's responded to then with this kind of filmic portrayal in a global framework.
Yeah, well, I think that would be so interesting just to hear about crime fiction also from other parts of the world, because I'm talking very much about the Nordic context and what it says about the Nordic context. And I would also like to point out that it's not like religion is a really common theme in Nordic crime fiction. Usually in film series, usually the detectives in one film or one TV episode, they will deal with religion, and it's usually then constructed in this sense. But there are other stories as well. And I don't think it's necessarily these stories that have inspired or caught the attention of the international audience. I think there are other aspects of Nordic crime fiction that interests people. I think particularly in Germany, it's sort of this, they argue that Nordic crime fiction shows the dark side of the so-called welfare state, that it's not that good in the Nordic countries either. They have problems too. So perhaps that, yeah.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
So what do you make of that prayer that you quoted, which is usually attributed to Reinhold Niebuhr and to the post Second World War, Cold War situation, but is most frequently encountered in addiction circles, Alcoholics Anonymous?
It's actually presented earlier on in the film as well, when the murderer has convinced Elisa, the wife of the main character, to come with him to a seminar where they talk about salvation in today's society, and they bring up the prayer there. I don't really know the point of it. I think this is more sort of the director. He's known for sort of using quite expressive religious elements. I don't know if he sort of just thought that this talked to the story. My interpretation is more that it can help give one understanding of the main character's struggle to sort of deal with what's going on in his life. But I mean, there are many ways of reading it and understanding it. So.
We'll squeeze in one more question.
The last category you pointed out as transformative religion. Is it related to the convention or Lutheran, you said, religion, or to alternative religion? More?
In this film, it is more Lutheran Christianity. Alternative, I don't know how you define alternative. If you're thinking alternative spirituality, it's quite uncommon in these films. But it's more this idea of faith being something that can help you through. Usually it's Christianity, since this is the Nordic context. But
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. And while our next speaker is lining things up, you need to be over here. Okay. I will go ahead and, I don't know if I can pull it much. You may need to go around. There are table legs here. There's a slight revision in the title. In case you're not able to read the Turkish translations of the movie films, Dr. Gregory Alan Robbins of the University of Denver will be speaking on Aftertones of Infinity, Biblical and Darwinian Evocations in Terrence Malick's Tree of Life and To the Wonder. Would you like your paper?
I would also like to add my thanks to the organizers and to the hosts for making this conference possible and for accepting my paper proposal and providing me and my partner with such a wonderful welcome here in Istanbul. How do you move it? Not the return key? Yeah. And which button moves it along? Oh, okay, great. Thanks. So the title of this paper takes as its point of departure 1979 poem by Joseph Schwantner, who is an American composer and poet. And this poem becomes the preface to a symphonic tone poem for which he won the Pulitzer Prize. I'm particularly interested in the theme of the final strophe, celestial voices echo the lost dreams of the children of the universe, the aftertones of infinity. Terrence Malick's films up until a few years ago had been few and far between. When he released Tree of Life in 2011, it was only his 5th film in 38 years. He's picked up his pace, as you can see, and Night of Cups was slated to be screened at the Cannes Film Festival just this week. In this paper, I shall argue that in The Tree of Life and To the Wonder, Malick continues to explore on an epic scale a theme I believe permeates the previous 4 and the current films, innocence to experience. I want to suggest that Malick's oeuvre reflects a recurring evocation of and commentary on the primeval biblical stories of Genesis 1 to 11. The title of his 2011 installment betrays, however, a more encompassing vision. Viewers whose gaze is oriented by biblical studies will associate the Tree of Life with Genesis 2 and Revelation 22. Few will recognize the Tree of Life as the name Charles Darwin gives to the only diagram in his On the Origin of Species, an illustration that captures graphically the implications of descent with modification over time by means of natural selection. The Tree of Life is a sprawling meditation on both trees. To the Wonder continues in the same vein. Malick, I maintain, is reckoning with those forces that seem to be built into the cosmic and societal scheme of things, energies that are at once creative and nurturing, destructive and tragic, and the mythic traditions to which moderns have explanatory recourse. The Tree of Life offers a visual counterpoint that overlays Imago Dei and the selfish gene. It is an image-rich fugue in which the biological record, read in tooth and claw, as limned by Tennyson in Memoriam, concurs with the psalmist's praise that the heavens tell the glory of God. By contrast, To the Wonder is a smaller film. While its title suggests and promises something more grandiose and mystical, the film offers only fleeting glimpses of the transcendent, the numinous. Like the Tree of Life, it is consumed with disappointment and loss, and yearning and the desire for return. In the end, To the Wonder resonates with the sentiment of Joseph Swantner's poem. Celestial voices echo the lost dreams of the children of the universe, the aftertones of infinity. Unlike Malick's previous films, The Tree of Life and To the Wonder open in the present. In The Tree of Life, the contemporary soon dissolves into the past, to Texas of the 1950s. A city truck spraying insecticide tells the viewer the setting is Waco. It is a sort of Eden. The truck notwithstanding, there's almost no traffic. Children play unmolested on tranquil streets, canopied by massive live oaks whose spreading branches filter and dapple the sun's rays. Among the kids is Jack, eldest brother to R.L., and Steve. His parents, neither of whom earn a first name, are the O'Briens, played by a heavier, jowly Brad Pitt and Jessica Chastain of Zero Dark 30 notoriety. They are stand-ins for the primordial couple. They are Adam and Eve. And To the Wonder, the couple's names are revealed only in the credits. No one utters those names in the body of the film. They are Neil and Marina. While the depiction of these couples captures, early on at least, a good deal of innocence and grace, disenchantment becomes palpable. Nor is disillusion theirs alone. Almost all of the folks in The Tree of Life devote more time to murmurs, cries, and whispers confided to us from the recesses of their own minds than to conversing with fellow human beings. There are lots of voiceovers, scarcely audible or impossible to discern by the audience. The effect strikes some as a sort of prayer, others find it maddening. Brother, mother are the first things we hear clearly in the film, followed not long after by a plea, Lord, why? Where were you? What are we to you? This is uttered by the mother. It could equally have come from the lips of Job, who is quoted in the film's epigraph, "Where were you when I created the foundations of the earth, when the morning stars sang together and the sons of God shouted for joy?" It is safe to assume, I think, that the mother's question, "What are we to you?" is directed toward the cosmos and to God. In To the Wonder, the Roman Catholic priest, Father Quintana, played by Javier Bardem, surveys the poverty, the misery, the loneliness, and alienation everywhere apparent in his parish. As he does so, in an extended voiceover, he intones a prayer based in part on the Celtic lorica or breastplate prayer, a chant sung while dressing oneself or arming for battle, attributed since the late 7th century to St. Patrick. The music that accompanies this brilliant montage is not the traditional hymn tune Deirdre. Rather, it is the plaintive 8-part canon of the second movement of Heinrich Goretzky's Third Symphony, his Symphony of Sorrowful Songs. And what is the Almighty's reply? It is not a speech from the whirlwind. Rather, in the Tree of Life, starting 19 minutes and 40 seconds into the film and lasting for almost 20 minutes thereafter, we see glimmers of unfathomable light, vast interstellar conflagrations, drifting throngs of stars, planets in their formless infancy, sun and moon occluded by dark storms, energizing jolts of lightning, gulping primordial pools, early plants, nascent creatures, slow-dancing jellyfish, hammerhead sharks, a dinosaur lounging on the shore, an embryo's eye, and last but not least, a child being born in post-war suburban Texas. All of this is accompanied by the haunting soprano obbligato of Zbigniew Preissner's Lacrimosa. This is reprised briefly, truncated considerably, in To the Wonder. In the end, both of these are grief-powered movies. In The Tree of Life, a telegram arrives, and we soon learn that Jack's younger brother, R.L., has died at the age of 19. The pious-tinged theodicies of well-meaning neighbors ring hollow. The platitudes of the parish priest, the prayer book's psalms do not console. About his younger son, a guitar-playing, sensitive sort, gullible and naive, Father says, "I made him feel shame, my shame." He asks, "How did you come to me? In what shape? What disguise?" A complaint is floated but never spoken by the O'Briens and their loss, the one any mourner, particularly parents consumed with grief, might utter. Why forge everything from the Big Bang onward if it's all going to conclude with this, a far greater cataclysm to us of a love's having been cut down in his prime? What, O Lord, is the point of it all? There are reports, unconfirmed of course, that Malik's own brother committed suicide in the 1960s. Some suggest that To the Wonder is a reminiscence of the director's failed early marriage. If these reports are to be trusted, they lend a certain perspective on the films and their sometimes self-indulgent, overwrought excesses. Could these be the filmmaker's very personal coming to terms with those chapters in his life? Who knows? Malik gives no interviews. Anthony Lane's reaction to The Tree of Life's 20-minute cosmic evolutionary interlude is one I share. You can call the entire passage overblown or diversionary. What it is not is incoherent or mad. It strikes me as a straightforward account of creation, Malik's own genesis, ending in the Eden of Jack's childhood. Everything else in the film dramatizes the loss of that prelapsarian grace and the rare Proustian instances in which it is remembered afresh. It is also possible to argue that the screenplay of The Tree of Life both parallels and dramatizes Charles Darwin's intellectual and spiritual journeys, culminating in the publication of Origin of Species in 1859. Tragedy struck the quiet and immensely happy domestic family of Darwin in 1851. While no Victorian was ever immune, a death in the family hit Darwin and his wife deeply. Their second child, the daughter they called Annie, died of an unidentified fever at the age of 10.
she was, by all accounts, the apple of Darwin's eye, precocious, curious, and a prankster. Annie's death may finally have tipped Darwin into agnosticism or outright disbelief. After this death, Darwin turned in his work with a new grimness to his work on the development of species, with an edge of determination that helped him carry on when other men might have abandoned their studies. During this period, Darwin devised what he called the principle of divergence. The principle was easy enough to characterize in words. He said that it was always advantageous for living beings to diversify. Competition for the same places in nature forced animals and plants to specialize, which in turn stimulated a multiplication of places and greater efficiency in the use of resources. He likened individual animals and plants to steel wedges thrusting ever harder into the softly yielding face of nature. In explaining divergence for his book, Darwin chose to rely not on words alone. He introduced one of the most powerful and lasting metaphors of his career. He characterized the history of living beings as a tree, describing extinct ancestral forms as if they were the roots and trunk, each main group of organisms as the branches, and all the multitude of species in existence at the present day as the green leaves and buds. A smoothly spreading evolutionary tree that linked nature and history into a single, indivisible, living whole spanning the ages. The tree of life, Darwin declared, fills with its dead and broken branches the crust of the earth and covers the surface with its ever-branching, beautiful ramifications. His ability to visualize the evolution of life in this way became almost synonymous with his understanding of it. At the deepest, most satisfying symbolic level, Darwin supplanted the ancient biblical imagery of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life. Darwin's is the tree of time. It is the tree of biological history spanning thousands of millennia. That is, it is Charles Lyell's history based on an examination of the geological record, not Bishop Ussher's biblical chronology. And it is a tree of knowledge, a tree of life and life's success. It is a tree, Darwin discovers, in the book of nature, not in God's book. And for Darwin, unlike Paley, nature's book does not necessarily bespeak a divine designer. In making this film, I think Malick has both construals of the tree of life, biblical and Darwinian, in mind. The tree of life is symbolic. It points beyond itself not simply to one thing. It has the capacity to evoke myths, those complexes of stories, some fact, some fiction, that for various reasons human beings regard as demonstrations of the meaning of the universe and human existence. As moderns, the biblical and Darwinian dramas are the ones to which we regularly appeal for their explanatory and function and value. And these mythic stories admit multiple readings. One line of reading is hopeful, the other is despairing, nihilistic. I think that's why Malick introduces the two ways in the early minutes of The Tree of Life, as a voiceover rendered by the mother who appears as a child. We are familiar with the schema. We find it laid out in the Gospel of Matthew. It also appears in chapters 1 through 5 of the Didache, and it's near the end of the Epistle of Barnabas, both 2nd century early Christian documents. In Malick's Tree of Life, these are hermeneutical strategies for negotiating life. The mother says we are taught two ways through life, the way of nature and the way of grace. You have to choose which one you'll follow. Grace doesn't try to please itself. It accepts being slighted, forgotten, and disliked. It accepts insults and injuries. Nature only wants to please itself, to get others to please it too. It likes to lord it over them, to have its own way. It finds reasons to be unhappy when all of the world is shining around it, and love is smiling through all things. No one who loves the way of grace ever comes to a bad end. It will be true to you whatever comes.
These two ways might be regarded as hermeneutical strategies for watching the tree of life as well. It also provides an interpretive lens through which to view To the Wonder, and by which to understand the significance of the roads that lead on the one hand to the cloistered garden area of Mont Saint-Michel, and on the other to the grounded earth ocean of Oklahoma. In positing the two ways, does Malick run the risk of reifying a naive dualism? Perhaps, I'm not sure. We do not get very far with these films if we simply regard the mother as having steadfastly pursued the road of grace and the father the path of nature. We fare no better by woodenly assuming that Marina and Neil are their named counterparts, or that their stories are but extensions of the dichotomy between nature and grace. Nor do we gain much leverage if we substitute the way of science for the way of nature, the way of religion for the way of grace. For we know from the tree of life that the way of grace is fraught with doubt. We know, too, that the way of nature, which cannot be equated merely with fallen human nature, produces much of astonishing beauty, which we see repeatedly in To the Wonder, a film in which Malick exploits the magic hour as beautifully as he did in The Days of Heaven. Malick does not beat us over the head with dendrology. Rather, his signature iconographic element for this film is what appears to be a shifting flame of red-yellow light. Critics have been confounded by the flame. Those of us who stay for the credits learn that the great Watsit is the work of a light artist, Thomas Wilfred, his Opus 161. Wilfred began honing this technique in the 1920s, and by the 1940s and 50s, his work was in the permanent holdings of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Whitney, and the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. It's called a lumia. And for Malick, the lumia flickers. We're drawn to it ineluctably. In To the Wonder, the lavish cinematography of Lubezki, and the quick cut editing of A.J. Edward, which ends with the final glimpse of Mont Saint-Michel, accomplish the same aesthetic goal. They are apertures, thonting openings, gates that beckon the viewer to join a cosmic meeting of humanity that is both unitive and celebratory. It is not unlike the compelling entangled bank Darwin teases his readers to contemplate in the final paragraph of Origin of Species. Clothed with many plants of many kinds, with birds singing on the bushes, with various insects flitting about, with worms crawling through the damp earth, Darwin hymns in prose that rivals Joseph Swantner's symphonic poem, Aftertones of Infinity. There is a grandeur in this view of life with its several powers, having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one, and that while this planet has gone on cycling according to the fixed laws of gravity from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. There's much grandeur in Malick's Tree of Life and To the Wonder, enough to rivet our attention on the first and indeed many subsequent viewings.
Thank you. That was almost precisely 20 minutes, so we will move on next to our fourth and final speaker for the day. While she is preparing her PowerPoint presentation, our next speaker is Adriana Stefano of Bucharest University in Romania. Her topic is Using Religion to Build the National Identity in Romanian Nationalist Communist Cinema.
Hello, everybody. I will talk today about Romanian Nationalist Communist Cinema. And for those of you who come from film study, you might wonder why haven't I chosen the Romanian New Wave, because as you some of you know, in Romanian cinema there are good things happening right now. There are good movie release, and those movie wins awards, and they are widely appreciated by international public. I've chosen to speak today about nationalist communist cinema because my interest lies in political science, and for me, media, film in this case, are important transmitters of values. In order to transmit values, films must reach audiences. And I will show you some figures in order to understand that Romanian New Wave, although very interesting to intellectual, are not seen by a lot of people. So this is Child's Pose, a Romanian New Wave movie. This movie, along with other 22 new Romanian movies, were seen in 2013 only by 282,000 of viewers, while The Wolf of Wall Street, in just 5 months after his release, was seen by 295,000 viewers. So these movies are interested, but they are not seen by the public. This film, particular, won many awards, but you cannot find it on internet. You cannot find it in Romanian DVD stores. You cannot see it in on cinema or on television. On the other hand, Mihai Viteazu, one of the films that I will talk today, was seen by 30 million of people, and these are data from 2006. So, in the last 10 years, many of them, many more see this film, and it is on YouTube, as you can see on the screen. In 3 years, he reached a larger audience that all New Wave cinema reached in 1 year, for example. So that's why I've chosen to speak today about national communist cinema, because those kind of movies are more important transmitters of values than new cinema, more interesting cinema. So as I told you, I will speak today about film as a social representation vehicle. So in society overtaken by communication, as Miej said, the reality is represented by the media, which create an environment of fiction. Fiction in this case means reflected realities that comes between us and reality. We see and we interpret slice of reality through the glass of media and the glasses that media makes us available. The bridge between the social and the individual world is built increasingly by media materials. The film is, due to the legitimacy that is invested by the spectators and its complex narrative structure, perhaps the most important transmitter of values and attitudes. Therefore, it builds social representation with an important impact. Film can have long-term influence on individual perception of reality. Cinema stereotypes are dangerously precise because they can easily be taken as a model by the audience. Our movies, that has to be a militant red thread, militant for our ideas about world and life, for the social humanism, for the politics, and for the development of our country. Therefore, in order to create the communist society, films must be produced by communist directors, subordinating artists' reasoning to the ideological ones. I dare to say that the communists in Romania were far more nationalist than the far-right movement that preceded. In fact, many far-right disciples shift sides from right to left without hesitation during the disturbed 5th decade of the 20th century. And Nicolae Ceausescu regime was more communist. It was communist in its practices, but nationalist in its belief. At the beginning, communism was a class-oriented ideology, but in the confused eastern of Europe with newborn countries and turbid history, the nationalist feeling could not be hidden for long. So in the 60s, communists tend to glide from internationalism toward nationalism, sometimes relatively discreet, sometimes to the extreme, and in Romania case, it was extreme. So the literacy about nationalism tend to see two different kinds of nationalism, that it's civic nationalism and ethnic nationalism. Civic nationalists believe that nations are social construct of the modern era as a result of industrialization and modernization of society, as Gellner said. Civic nationalists conceive nation in terms of citizenship by offering equal rights to all citizens regardless of their ethnicity. And there is another type of nationalism, and this is where Romania fits. Ethnic nationalists believe that nations are built on primordial ethnic ties, including blood, kinship beliefs, etc. Ethnic nationalism is an inward-looking, aiming to uphold one's values and interests regardless of the other group living in the same state. So this is the kind of nationalism that you will see in Romanian cinema. There is one highly accepted mark of the Romanian collective imaginary, according to which Romanian people is a nation born Christian Orthodox. This idea, without any historical support, but widespread both by nationalist politicians and cultural elite in the early 20th century, was designed to differentiate Romanians from other nations in the region and to compensate for the vassal bondage to the Ottoman Empire and its Islamic religion. On the screen you have two quotes that emphasize this linkage between Orthodox and Romanian, and I will read just one. We are Orthodox because we are Romanian, and we are Romanian because we are Orthodox. Can we be Catholics? To become Catholics, we must transform ourselves to realize this Catholicism. This transformation would lead to the loss of our history and our national structure. In other words, this means giving up our humanity. There aren't three solutions. Either we stay Romanian, but then our Catholicism is not possible. Either we become Catholics, but then we are not longer Romanian. So this is a quote from Nae Ionescu, a very important philosopher in Romania in the early 20th century. Even atheists, in essence, the communist regime heavily used this idea in order to construct a new nationalist communist Romanian identity towards propaganda films, among other cultural resources. So the research question for this paper is to deconstruct the usage of religion in propaganda film and to illustrate the link between religion, Orthodox, Christian, and Romanian nationality as it results from this film. Also, I will focus on the dichotomy we versus other, and I will try to identify the future of different religious denomination in presented films. So, research methodology, as I already told you, this paper is based on Serge Moscovici social representation theory, and that's why I will look for the central core and the peripheral system, as Abric stated in his book about social representation researching. And of course, I will use CD8, critical discourse analysis, as Ruud Wodak presented. So the corpus of my analysis consists in 3 movies. Daci, The Ducks, in 1966, Mihai Viteazu, Mihai the Great, or it was called Mihai the Great, The Last Crusade, and Mircea the Wise Man. Following Orwell's saying, the one who controls the present controls the past, the one who controls the past controls the future, Nicolae Ceausescu ordered since 1965 the cinematic version of the most important Romanian historical moments which allowed the emphasis, the proud resistance in the confrontation with the enemy, no matter its name, but its capacity to embody the URSS and West as well. All three movies fit in this category. So I will not walk you through Romanian history or mythological history, but you should know that Dacs and Romans are considered the ancestor of Romanian nation. The contribution of each is a matter of Romanian mythology. Due to present needs, Ceausescu's propaganda favored the Dacs, a small group of people defending their land and their god. The history records 2 wars between Dacs and Roman. The last one was lost by Dacs, of course. The topic of this movie is the first war that concluded with Dacs' victory over the outnumbered Romans. So the second one, Mihai Viteazu, Mihai the Great, Mihai the Great was the uniter of all Romanian against their enemy. This was the most expensive Romanian movie ever produced and one of the most viewed. He is on the 3rd place of the most viewed movie in Romanian cinema. The fundamental idea of this movie is that a little country craved by all united around its most beloved son. So the third film was not an obvious choice like the other two. Mircea was not chosen because he was his own attributes, but because Mihai Eminescu, a Romanian poet, dedicated him one of his poems, and so rise him in the pantheon. I have to say that all those 3 movies were directed by the same director, and the actor that played the leading part in the first 2 is the same actor. He unfortunately died during an earthquake, and that's why Sergiu Nicolaescu, the director itself, took his place and played the third part. So it's supposed to be like avatars of the same ruler in all those 3 movies. So religion in Romanian nationalist cinema, as it results from this movie. On the screen you have some synthetic data. In the docs, there is a Zamolxes cult, and I have to say that we don't know anything about Zamolxes, but in Romanian mythology, Zamolxes is an avatar of the Orthodox god. So there are similarities between Zamolxes and Orthodoxy, but not stated in the movie. On the other hand, there are Romans, the other in this movie, and there isn't any mention of their religion whatsoever in the movies. Not when they bury the people, not when they talk, not any information about their religion. Mihai Viteazu is Orthodox, of course, and there are 2 types of enemy, religious enemy, the Catholics and the Islam. And in Mircea, also Orthodox, we'll see also the Catholics and Islam as enemies. So, in Daci, this movie was produced in the first part of the Romanian communism, and that's why it only slightly touches religious issues. There are whatsoever some religious elements that link the state, and especially the ruler, with religion, and instated the symphony between religion and the state. As you can see on the screen, at Decebal's right, there is a Zamolxes priest, but he does not speak unless he was asked, and always obeyed his will to the ruler will. Although there are a few references of the religion in the entire movie, one cannot neglect the perfect harmony between God and the ruler, and the predisposition of God to obey the first, not the other way around. For example, when Decebal sent his only son as a sacrifice to Zamolxes, I will talk about this later, and Zamolxes do not respond promptly, Decebal choir and threat the gods delay the answer to bed for them. At the end of the scene, the rain, the expected answer, begin to fall, biblically flooding the land. So the gods answered because it's normal to do that. So there is a Christic dimension of Kotizo. Kotizo is the solely son of Decebal, and he's undocumented by history, but this solely son of Decebal is sacrificed by his father and sent to an horrified death. He is thrown into spears for the good of the people. More to that, a woman believed in his return and claimed that this resurrection will meant the salvation of all the people. So this is a Christic dimension of Kotizo, and it's very well emphasized in this movie. On the screen, there is the moment when they throw him to spears. I would like to talk about the symphony between religion and the state, and for symphony is it's a concept linked to orthodoxy, and both Mihai Viteazu and in Mircea, they are religious reference to that link Romanians with the Orthodox religion, but also subordinate this religion to the national interest. Nor Mircea nor Mihai have deep religious feeling, but both honor the ancestor faith, a united country with a single set of beliefs. And there is a priest, there is an image of the priest. I don't think that you see very well on the screen, but the priest is more a warrior than a priest. And Mihai asked him, what do you want, priest? You want to be archbishop? No, I want to stay with the army, because the church is subordinated to the national interest. And of course, when he has to be crowned as a king, Mihai asked him, hey priest, do you remember how to preach? Because he is more a fighter than a preach. On the other hand, there is a deceiving Catholicism in those movies. The Catholic Church is threatened the Romanian way of being. The Catholic Church is manipulative and deceiving. A Catholic priest is the center of the Hungarian leader to allure Mircea, daughter-in-law. No one, not only that she's supposed to convince her husband to become vassal, but also to change his religion and implicit the religion of the country. More, if Mircea will not be convinced, the priest suggests other ways to get rid of the old man, the ways being poison. At the end, the deceiver is deceived. The one who supposedly negotiated with him the terms of the vassality were in fact loyal to Mircea, because no Romanian could be Catholic, and therefore it is impossible to betray the religion. There are interconnection between religion and politics in the Catholic world. Also, the Romanian side is united in its ideal. Everybody knows their places. All fight for the same purpose, the national unity. In the West, the situation is opposite. The priest become king, the king become priest. And in the screen, the same character is a king, and after that he become priest. And everybody followed their own interests, disregarding the values that pledged to defend. So a little bit about Islam. Islam is the dark side of religion, and I thought of Pink Floyd when I chose this title. Is a godless religion that encouraged fratricide and encouraged people to spit their father. In this image, Bayazid, who was caught by an enemy, is spit by his sons in order that one of them will gain power. So it is the only information about the Islamic religion. They do that in the name of God. So otherwise, there are information about Islam, and of course we know that the Turks are, the Ottomans are Islam, but are part of the Islam, but don't know anything else. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. Very good. Precisely 20 minutes. So with that, I was intrigued that we have just moved from Mircea Eliade's understanding of time and the religious escape from history to Ceausescu's attempt to ideologically control the cinematic representation of the past. So there was an interesting kind of coherence, especially to the first and last papers. I have been asked